Good morning, JFK fellow travelers. This is Saturday morning, the 10th of February. It is my wife's birthday. So it's going to be a short little video today. And I wanted to finish it up this week because it is the culminating video of this series going along with the Russians and what they knew when they knew it about Oswald, also what they knew when they knew it about the assassination. And this is episode 30. So it'd be nice to end this week on a nice round number. Want to say I appreciate all the comments I'm getting on YouTube. You're teaching me things. We're teaching each other. It's cool. That's the whole point of this. Nice dialogue. And I'm finding out that there are more people interested in this topic than I thought. You know, for 25 years, I've kind of kept it to myself, and every now and then I'll talk to somebody about it until I see their eyes roll back in their head, and then I stop and I move along. Most of the dialogue I've had over the 25 years has been with my students, not with adults. But I'm finding out there's a lot of adults out there that care about this topic, that have given it a lot of thought and have done some research on their own. So that's a really cool thing. Check out my website, standardsplushistoryacademy.com. I got a lot of materials on there for educational purposes, high school educational. So if anybody's out there is a homeschool student or parent, there's plenty of history resources available. Also, online teaching. If you want me to actually do the online teaching, there's that option as well. A couple books, and my Wilderness of Mirrors book just came out on Audible, so that's an option. There's also some blogs, and which I really need to update. I haven't been as regular with the blog as I need to be. There's a lot of podcasts on there as well. So just check out the website if you feel free, or if you feel like you want to. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free. And hit the notification bell so you're notified when I drop new content, and the thumbs up. Okay, everybody ready to get started? In the previous episode, we were looking at actually the previous two episodes, we were looking at what the Soviets knew when they knew it about Oswald, about the assassination. And we told the story of Richard Case Nagel and how Nagel was a double agent for the CIA, which means he's working for our government, but he's also he's pretending to work for the Soviets, and he's reporting back to our government. He's a double agent. And it said that he and Oswald worked together at Sugi, and we learned that they were both in counterintelligence at that time. We've spent a lot of time methodically trying to show that Oswald was in intelligence, and this is just another piece of evidence of that. And then we learned that the Soviets by 62, no, actually 61, because that's when Oswald's starting to write letters to the American embassy requesting to go back to America. So they now know in 61 that he's a fake defector. And in 62, when he returns with Marina and a baby, they have successfully attached one of their own agents to one of ours. So they play the double agent game too. A little bit different way, but they accomplish the same purpose. They also assigned what they thought was their agent at the time, Richard Case Nagel, to follow him wherever he went, because they were convinced that the Americans went to such lengths to bring Oswald back. He must be important and going to factor in future operations, and they want to be aware. So this is how we find out this story that takes place in over the course of time, but it culminates in late September. And Nagel finds out through his surveillance of Oswald that Oswald has infiltrated Alpha 66. Alpha 66 is being run out of Mexico City by David Atlee Phillips. Mexico City just happens to be where Richard Case Nagel is also operating out of. Alpha 66 is being used by David Atlee Phillips and the CIA to wage a secret war against Cuba. to try to undercut the new trusting relationship between the Kennedy White House and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. So this is the whole purpose of Oswald's existence as an FBI informant, to tell Bobby Kennedy, who then funnels it into the White House, what the CIA is up to. So he tells him. And of course, this had been making, all these attacks on Cuba had been making Kennedy look like a liar again. Remember, he lied the first time, changed the Operation 40 to Operation Mongoose. So Khrushchev's got to be wondering about him. And Kennedy doesn't have control over this. So he tries to assert control. He sends down the customs officials and various other law enforcement to shut down all the training camps, to shut down this private war. This infuriates the CIA and all the Cubans, of course, the Cuban refugees. Guys like Angelo and Leopoldo were part of Alpha 66. In fact, Alpha 66 is predominantly all made up of all Cubans, that were recruited as from the refugee population down there in Miami and New Orleans. So they're furious with him for shutting down the camps. The CIA is furious with him. So simultaneous to that, kind of on the side, Oswald has, by infiltrating Alpha 66, discovered that there's a plot to kill the president, in revenge for all these failures in Cuba. Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, now shutting down the bases. So he infiltrates that, and he is wise to what the plan is, which is how, getting ahead of here, but November 2nd, he is able to leave a message for the FBI field office in Chicago about a plot to kill the president on November 2, because he has this inside information. Well, if he has this information, so does Richard Case Nagel, because Richard Case Nagel is attached to him at the hip. And of course, they're friends or associates going back to Atsugi. So Nagel's reporting back to the KGB everything that he's learning, and the KGB gets alarmed, because if they're going to blame Oswald, and what Nagel figures out that Oswald hadn't quite figured out yet is that Angelo and Leopoldo are being used to set up Oswald as the patsy in this assassination. Nagel figures that out, and he goes back to the KGB and tells them what he thinks, and they're alarmed because they realize if he gets blamed, they're going to get blamed, and this is going to turn into an international incident, which could lead to a war. So they give Nagel orders: tell Oswald what you know. If he doesn't receive it, kill him. Take the patsy out. So he does. He tells Oswald, and Oswald doesn't believe him. Not initially, anyway. I'm sure it's bouncing around in his head a little bit, but not enough to take any action. But Nagel doesn't kill him. He doesn't want to murder anybody. He's a spy. He's not a murderer. So he comes up with a plan. He says, well, I'll write a letter. I'll write a letter, and this is to the FBI in J. Edgar Hoover. And so he writes a letter. He gives specifics. He tells the dates. He tells the city. He tells who's behind it, who's being set up to be the patsy. He tells them everything. So we know that our FBI knows that this assassination plot is underfoot. There's written documentation that Richard Case Nagel wrote to J. Edgar Hoover. But of course, Hoover does nothing with it, and that causes Nagel to have to go to option B. Yeah, that was plan A. Plan B is I'm going to have to get myself arrested so that I am not on the hook to murder Lee Harvey Oswald. I've already tried to out the plan. That hasn't worked. So, I am being instructed by my KGB handlers, to murder Oswald, and I don't want to do that. So in order to foreclose on that, and that's the story, he goes in September 20, or about 2 months before the assassination, fakes a burglary, gets arrested, and ends up 4.5 years in prison. But he tells the police, he said, I'd rather be sitting in a jail cell for burglary than be a murderer or commit treason. And I'm sure they don't know what he's talking about. But not, and of course, after all this happens, he gets out of jail, and we fast forward a little bit. He gets out of jail, and now he's free, and he has this information. He has quite a story to tell. CIA keeps him quiet. They've try to kill him 3 different times. And he gets the message. And the message is, you better shut up, better keep your story to yourself. If you want to keep your pension, and if you want to stay alive, if you want your family to stay alive. So he does for years and years and years. And then in my addendum yesterday, I talked a little bit about Dick Russell and how he became aware of this story because of Jim Garrison, and Jim Garrison becomes aware of this story in the late 60s, and he tries hard to convince in the Clay Shaw trial, he tries hard to convince Richard Case Nagel to go on the record, or at least to testify against the CIA and being behind this whole plot, Alpha 66. He does name some names that are CIA connected, but he won't go after the agency. He's according to Jim Garrison, he's just stubborn as a mule. He won't budge on it. He will not. Well, now we know why. His life was being threatened. And so Jim Garrison couldn't use him as a witness, but Dick Russell wants to write a book about it. And so, we fast forward now to the 90s, and he has become, he's sort of become trustworthy in Richard Case Nagel's view. And he has gotten a lot of the story out of Nagel. He never felt like he got all of it, but he got a lot of it out. And he uses that as the subject matter for his book, The Man Who Knew Too Much, which came out, I believe, in 92, the first edition of it. There's been subsequent editions as well. And based on what he knew, he reported back to the AARB when he was interviewed that this is somebody you might want to speak with. And so the AARB sent a letter to Richard Case Nagel saying, hey, we've been made aware that you have materials, you have documents, you have recordings, and that is our job, to compile all the evidence and release it to the public. Would you be interested in sitting down with us? And a very short time later, Richard Case Nagel was found dead of an apparent heart attack. His family members don't believe the cause of death. And now he had mentioned to his niece and to his son that he had a purple trunk that had he says, everything everybody's looking for is in that purple trunk. And they didn't even know what it was. So after he died, they found the address to a storage unit several states away. The son got in his car and he drove and to that storage unit. When he got there, everything was there except one thing, the purple trunk. And when he returned home, his house had been ransacked. So that answers the question, what did the Soviets, the KGB, know? They knew that Oswald was a fake defector. They knew that the CIA was plotting to kill the president, and they knew they were setting up Oswald to be the fall guy. All right, they knew that in September. And so that is going to lead us into something that happens 4 days before the assassination, which informs the Soviets even further. And the question I asked today, and I haven't covered Operation Northwoods yet, but I'm going to give you a little sneak peek today, because I believe this wholeheartedly. I really believe this. I believe that the JFK assassination was a fulfillment of the CIA's long desired dream of creating a war with Cuba through an Operation Northwoods. That summer, I believe it was in July, the Joint Chiefs and the CIA, Allen Dulles, it wasn't Allen Dulles. I take that back. It was John McCone at this point. Allen Dulles has been fired. So they go to the White House and they talk to JFK, and Bobby is there, about getting the green light for an Operation Northwoods. And in the documents, which are widely available, you can see what the Operation Northwoods is. It's an attack on an American target by us, okay? But we're going to make it look like it was an attack by Cuba, or it could be any country that we want to go to war with, but in this case, it'd be Cuba, so that we would have a pretext to go to war. It's a false flag, is what it is. And they included in the documents attacks on shopping malls, airplanes, prominent people, any kind of prominent target, prominent American target. And when Kennedy was querying them about it, They said, well, this isn't new. We've been doing this forever. And they used, it's right there in the document. They used as an example the USS Maine, and how the USS Maine was, if you remember, we'd never fought a foreign war. We'd never fought off our soil before, but we wanted desperately to fight Spain in the Spanish-American War because we realized we could get a lot of colonies, especially Cuba. Cuba was the prize. But we could get the Philippines, we could get Guam, we could get Puerto Rico, we could get Cuba. Spain wouldn't be that hard to defeat. We just needed a pretext. We need a justification. So we sent the USS Maine down to Cuba, parked it in Havana Harbor, and sure enough, Spain controlled Cuba, and tensions were high, and there was an explosion on the USS Maine. US sailors were killed, and we blamed it on the Spanish, and that became the pretext to go to war. And sure enough, quick, easy, they called it the Splendid Little War. And we got hooked on this little war-making strategy because of what we got out of it. We got all kinds of goodies, all those colonies I just told you about. And so they put in their document that the whole USS Maine thing was fabricated. It was a false flag. We put the ship in harm's way. We created the explosion, killing our own people, and then blamed it on the Spanish. And they said that's we've done this before, and they referenced the USS Maine. Remember the Maine, the battle cry. And I know when I teach this topic to my students, we start looking at all the foreign wars since the Spanish American. There's always a precipitating event. It makes you wonder, if you think about the Spanish American War was the Maine. You fast forward to World War I, it was what really got the Americans fired up was the Lusitania, and the Zimmerman Note, which the Germans claimed they didn't author, and a lot of suspicion about who authored that. And then World War II was Pearl Harbor, which we had broken the Japanese codes. We knew what they were doing. The night before, we sail all our aircraft carriers out of Pearl Harbor to protect them, and we sacrifice everything else. And that was just what we needed to get. The next day, we're at war. Vietnam was Gulf of Tonkin, which LBJ himself on White House Oval Office tape was caught laughing about it, saying those sailors were shooting at flying fish because they said that they were being fired on by the Viet Cong. That turns into the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which turns into the Vietnam War. I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but 9/11, the war on terror, where does it end? So, and this is what my students always bring up. They start thinking this. I don't. They start bringing it up. So leads to some pretty interesting discussions. But anyway, I believe that's what this JFK assassination was. Bobby and JFK got up and stormed out. They said, this is crazy. We are not launching attacks on American citizens in shopping malls or on airplanes or in neighborhoods or schools or churches. We're not going to do it. That's crazy. And shut it down. Well, how big of a stretch is it to believe that the CIA just went ahead with it anyway? They were already fighting an illegal war with Cuba against the White House's instructions. They just did whatever they want. I haven't talked about this yet, but there was an assassination plot against de Gaulle in France that failed, and de Gaulle contacts the Kennedy White House and said, hey, why is your CIA trying to kill me? And JFK's like, excuse me, I don't know anything about it. And he goes, but I'll check. And he gets back to de Gaulle and he says, I apologize. Obviously, I am not in control of my own government. That's a direct quote. So the CIA is running rogue, absolutely running rogue. You think about November 2, what was supposed to happen in Chicago. That's the same day that our CIA set up No Din Diem to be assassinated in Vietnam. And that was not supposed to be an assassination. JFK had signed off on a coup, overthrow him, but not an assassination. The CIA had him assassinated. It's called extraordinary rendition. We didn't pull the trigger, but we took him to the people that did. We set him up. And again, that was a violation of what Kennedy wanted. So the CIA is doing its own thing. So why wouldn't they just say, well, we tried to get the official word from the president. He said, no, we're going to do our own thing. Because they've already decided Kennedy's weak. He's not going to greenlight anything that is necessary to fight the Cold War. So I believe that the American target became JFK, prominent American target. There isn't anything more prominent than the American president. And then blame it on Cuba. Well, what did they start doing in the summer of '63? They start setting up the patsy as a pro-Castro, agitator. He's starting a Fair Play for Cuba committee in New Orleans. He's running around handing out leaflets. He's already been to Russia. He came back and he's got a Russian wife. So he's clearly a communist. When he gets arrested for the pseudo fight with Carlos Bringuier in New Orleans, they have a big interview with him on the radio and TV where he claims he's a Marxist Leninist. It's beautiful. It's all set up. So you're gonna take out the American target, and then you're gonna throw in this Mexico City story where he met a month before the assassination. Went to the Cuban embassy 3 different times, the Russian embassy twice. He's trying to get a passport to Cuba so that he has an escape plan. I mean, what they're going to say is he's trying to get an escape route for after he commits the assassination, run away to Cuba. Oh, and while he's there, he's meeting with a Soviet specialist in assassinations, Valery Kostakov. And when he comes back, what's the first thing he does? He assassinates the president. So it is all set up. And if everything goes to plan, they're going to roll this out to the American people and say a pro-Castro guy went acting on the orders of Cuba, using the expertise provided him by Valery Kostakov, which is Cuba's ally, the Soviet Union, assassinated your president. What do you want us to do about it? And it's waving the bloody shirt. We'd be in Cuba the next day. That was the plan. So you say, well, that's a long intro into today's event. Well, I think it's necessary because this story is pretty fascinating. Now we're 4 days before the assassination, the actual event. So we've moved up to November 18th, which means Richard Case Nagel's sitting in a jail cell somewhere, and Oswald's operating out of Dallas at this point. The Soviets have known since September, 2 months ago, that Oswald is in Dallas, being set up to be the patsy. They know that the president's coming to Dallas in 4 days. This whole thing is all getting close. And I can just see them. They're like, they got front row seats to history. They know they're like time travelers. They know in advance what's fixing to happen. And they're watching all this. Who else knows? J. Edgar Hoover, and he's letting it happen too. Let that sink in for a minute. Our FBI. So the Soviet embassy, which is pictured here in Washington, D.C., they receive a typed letter, and it's crudely typed. I don't know what that means, crudely typed, but it's got a bunch of misspelled words in it. And it's signed by Lee H. Oswald of Dallas. And here they are getting this letter 4 days before the assassination. This is going to attract some attention because this is the guy that's being set up. And the letter begins, quote, "This is to inform you of recent events. Since my meetings with Comrade Kostin in the embassy of the Soviet Union, Mexico City, Mexico." Comrade Kostin was another name for Kostakov. So remember now, Oswald always leaves a paper trail. He's being ordered to leave this paper trail. In this case, it's pretty obvious what this is. He is putting on paper something that the CIA is going to claim after the assassination. Remember, the CIA is going to come out with a story that Oswald went to Mexico City and met with Valery Kostakov. Wouldn't it be great if they had some written documentation of that meeting? Because we already know that the picture is not going to fly, the recordings aren't going to fly, Marita Lorenz's testimony is not going to fly. They're going the extra mile here. Whoever is setting all this up, and we know it's David Atlee Phillips, is going the extra mile. The purpose of the letter to the Russians, anyway, was clearly obvious. It's asserting a connection. It's one more layer of connection between the patsy and the Soviets by throwing that name in there and throwing that embassy meeting down in Mexico City. Okay. This is 4 days before the assassination. Well, as was customary, and the Soviets are aware of this. Okay. They know this has happened, just like we know that they're intercepting our letters in their countries. The Oswald letter was intercepted and opened and copied by the FBI before it was delivered to the Soviet embassy. So when the Soviets read any of their mail, they know that the FBI is reading it too. And they know that the FBI has a copy of this. And they're thinking, okay, this is setting up to be released publicly. The FBI is going to leak this letter after the assassination. And then they're going to dump the Mexico City story. And they're going to work together to point the finger of blame at Oswald. Boy, it's going to be an open and shut case. And so the Soviets are trying to figure out, okay, what do we do to counteract this? Because they've already, since September, we've known they're setting him up. This is the coup de grace. This is the bullet to the head that they're going to release afterwards, showing that he was meeting with an assassination specialist who was Soviet. He was trying to get a Cuban passport. All the Mexico City stuff is going to be corroborated by this letter. So they realize what this is. And the Soviet ambassador cabled Moscow on November 26th, 4 days after the assassination. So they wait 8 days, about a week, a little bit over a week. And he writes to Moscow, and he says, quote, this letter, he's writing about this alleged letter from Oswald. He says, this letter was clearly a provocation. It gives the impression we had close ties with Oswald and we're using him for some purposes of our own. It was totally unlike any other letters the embassy had previously received from Oswald. Remember, Oswald has written the Soviet embassy before. They've gotten letters from him. They've intercepted letters from him, and they're always, always, always handwritten. This one was typed. And Brennan notices that. He says, suspicion that the letter is a forgery is heightened by the fact that it was typed, whereas the other letters the embassy had received from Oswald before were handwritten. One gets the definite impression that the letter was concocted by those who, judging from everything, are involved in the president's assassination. Remember, they know who's involved. They know it's the CIA. So without saying so, he's saying the CIA has concocted this letter. They typed it. They signed his name to it. And this is all to indict him and indict us. So the Soviets decide to do something with this information. Dobrynin and Anastas Mikoyan, who was the first deputy chairman of the Soviet Council of Ministers, he's back in Moscow. And they agree together, we're going to make this public. We're going to return a copy of this letter to the U.S. authorities publicly. And we are going to assert formally as a country that this letter is a forgery, it's doctored, and it was sent as a deliberate provocation. We're going to make this public. And when that happened, when they informed U.S. officials that that was their intention, the FBI couldn't release it. The whole plot falls apart because the Soviets called the Americans bluff. The Soviets called the CIA's bluff. They overturned any propaganda value that the letter would have. They overturned by making it public or threatening to make it public. They recognized in advance it was counterfeit. And the reason if none of this had happened with Richard Case Nagel, this is why I told the story about Richard Case Nagel first. If none of this had happened with Richard Case Nagel, if they hadn't been following Oswald around and learned in advance that he was being set up in this assassination plot, they might have took this more seriously. But they know what it is. As soon as they get it, they know. And the fact that the letter was typed was just further proof. And they know it's a counterfeit. And so they just basically tell the Americans, hey, listen, this is bullshit. That's what this is. And this is a forgery. You're trying to set us up in the same way that you're setting up Oswald. You might be able to set up Oswald, but you can't set us up. We know. we know the truth. And so by this point, this is November 26th or so, 26, 27, 28. This is about a week and a half, 2 weeks after the assassination. By this point, the Mexico City is falling apart on its own. It has already fallen apart. The J. Edgar Hoover, who knows the thing is bullshit to begin with, has already gone to LBJ and said the story is not true. The recordings of the voice, it's not Oswald. The pictures of the guy claiming to be Oswald, it's not Oswald. They've already tortured Marina Lorenz, tried to get her to say it was Oswald, and she said, no, that the guy I met with is not Oswald. The FBI went after Fenella Farrington, trying to get her to say she met with that. They're trying desperately to save this Mexico City story. It can't be saved. They thought this letter would save it, but now the Soviets have called their bluff. And so the whole Mexico, this is why David Atlee Phillips has to come out later and disavow it, the whole Mexico City story, because it became a problem. What was supposed to be the nail in the coffin for Oswald was so badly done and so obvious to the Soviets. And I will say this, I don't credit the Soviets with, being super sleuths and figuring it out. I credit Richard Case Nagel with giving them a heads up. So that's why they know this letter's a fake. They already know from Richard Case Nagel that this is happening, and they know who's responsible for the assassination, and they know that those intelligence agencies can fake letters. They set people up for stuff all the time. They do it themselves. So the Richard Case Nagel is so important in this scenario. And of course, it really, I think it shines a light on the FBI. We kind of operate on the assumption that the CIA does stuff like this, and they shouldn't, especially here in America, but they do. And you hope that the FBI is an honest broker in all of this, but they weren't. It wasn't. J. Edgar Hoover wasn't. They tried desperately, even though they knew from the jump that the story was bullshit. Mexico City, they tried, to bully Fenella Farrington into making up evidence to buttress the story. J. Edgar Hoover, when he got the letter saying, hey, Oswald's being set up, did nothing with it. And they are going to leak this letter. That's the plan. They're the ones who copied it, and they're going to leak it to help to see it. And now they can't. And so all the plans involving Mexico City and this meeting with Valery Kostikov and the Cuban passport, and this is all part of Operation Northwoods to get the American people stirred up to want to go to war with Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro. That's the whole point of it. And it all falls apart. It's kind of interesting. You think, well, we didn't go to war with Cuba. Why didn't we? We did blame a guy who had Cuban ties. Why didn't? Well, because all this stuff that was being prepared to drop as the cover story to add layers and drive the American people to the edge where they would demand war couldn't be used. Or if it was used, it was so flimsy, it became patently obvious that it wasn't reliable. The photo, the Warren Commission does use, include in their exhibits, the photo of a man claiming to be Oswald coming and going from the embassies. And anyone, a novice, can look at that and say it's not Oswald. But the Warren Commission, they didn't think anyone would read the Warren report anyway. It's 888 pages. No one's going to read this. We're going to put it in there, and we're going to include it as part of our evidence. But it's not until the researchers start looking at it that they realize this is utter bullshit, and they're including as their evidence. All the people in the know that this has all been concocted. LBJ has been told by J. Edgar Hoover. He knows the Mexico City story is fake. J. Edgar Hoover knows. He's known since September that Oswald was going to be blamed for this. Did nothing about it. He knows that letter that they copied that ended up at the Soviet embassy is a fake. Okay, I promise you, if the Soviet KGB knows it's a fake, J. Edgar Hoover knows it's fake. he knows Vanilla Farrington didn't have a conversation or meet with Oswald down Mexico City. And yeah, he's trying to make it happen anyway. So the CIA is aware. They're the ones doing this whole thing, pulling all the strings. The FBI is aware. LBJ is aware. It's and we've already discussed all the times Dallas police manufactured or planted or hid evidence, tampered with evidence. So you got to assume the Dallas police are in on it to some degree. All of the authorities, the people that we trust in our country to get to the bottom of crimes like this and hold people accountable, they're the ones perpetrating the crime and the cover up. And it's the Soviets. It's the Soviets who, well, it's people like Richard Case Nagel who figured it out. Oswald who figured it out. It's the Soviet KGB who figures it out. And they aren't Soviets, you might be able to get one over on Lee Harvey Oswald, an individual. You might be able to get one over on Richard Case Nagel. Both of those are CIA assets. You control their fate anyway, but you can't do that with the KGB. And so they realized, okay, they know they're on to us, and so we can't use this. So back to my original question from several episodes ago. What did the Soviet KGB know, and when did they know it? They were aware of this in real time 2 months before it happened. And they were aware of the importance of Oswald 2 years before it happened. And they're just patiently following Oswald around, watching him. And then as far as today's story is concerned, or question is concerned, was this an excuse? Was this just the Operation Northwoods that Kennedy refused to entertain? Was this the CIA doing it anyway? And I believe it was. I mean, it fits the definition. And the CIA is already documented to have been doing its own thing, going against orders from the Kennedy White House, is doing their own thing, conducting an illegal war in Cuba, operating all these illegal training bases down in Miami and New Orleans. Where does it stop? And why would they not do this? This is what they wanted to do. And if Kennedy said no, they're already disobeying on all these other fronts. Why not disobey him here and kill two birds with one stone? No pun intended. Get him out of the way. Kennedy's the one obstacle to going to war with Cuba. Get him out of the way so that we can go to war with Cuba and get Castro out of the way. Literally get two birds out, kill two birds with one stone. So, pretty interesting story. We found out about a lot of this, by the way, when the Soviet Union fell and the KGB was disbanded, and documents became available. And oh boy, the Soviets had a lot of documents on Lee Harvey Oswald. They had a lot of documents on this time period that were very interesting. And so you start putting together what they had in their document trough, and you put together with what Richard Case Nagel is saying, what Lee Harvey Oswald, was saying. And he didn't say a lot, but he did say some things to Judith Berry that ring true with all this story. He did say some things when he got arrested about being a patsy, and you start putting all those puzzle pieces together, and you realize, my goodness. Well, that's that, and I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be moving into another topic. I'm probably going to take tomorrow off, and we're going to move into a new topic on Monday. So that'll be episode 31. So watch for that. And we'll, trust me, we got a long way to go. I get a lot of comments from people. I wish you'd do an episode on this, or why don't you trust me? We got a long way to go. I've got a lot of material about a lot of different, it has a lot of legs that go a long way in different directions. So we'll get to things, but I do appreciate the heads up on things, because sometimes it helps me understand where you guys are and what you're thinking, so that maybe I change course slightly and go in that direction, come back, circle around, get what I was going to cover get it later. But anyway, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Enjoy the rain wherever you are. I'm getting rained on. It's supposed to rain all weekend. So until next time, everybody have a great weekend. Thank you. Bye.